Hello, I'm Carmen Lilith, aka the Yoga Witch. Welcome to The Witch Wound Part 2, Identifying and Healing in Modern Day. Last week in Part 1, we discussed the history of this wound and a bit of what this wound is. This week in Part 2, we are going to be diving into how and why this wound continues to show up even centuries later, as well as explore how we can heal on both an individual level and in the collective consciousness. So, to begin, how has this wound survived centuries? There are several ways a wound such as the witch wound can survive generation after generation, and one of those ways is through ancestral trauma. Ancestral trauma is trauma and wounds that have been passed down from generation to generation, specifically within a family unit. It can be passed through family conditioning, psychology, biology, and even through energetics within the womb. Conditioning shows up as learned beliefs, coping mechanisms, and behaviors from the family environment. When children observe repeated behaviors by their parents, they begin to internalize them subconsciously and even begin to mirror their family's behaviors. An example of this would be if a parent deals with conflict through yelling, screaming, swearing, then the child is going to observe that and thus believe that yelling, swearing, and screaming is how someone deals with conflict. This spreads through family dynamics, parenting styles, and even unspoken rules about expressing or repressing emotion. Biologically speaking, severe and prolonged stress after a traumatic event can result in a chemical tag that changes the way DNA functions. These tags tell your cells what genes to quote unquote turn on and off, and this can essentially silence the genes that tell your nervous system that you are safe, thus leaving you in a perpetual state of fight or flight. This also causes cortisol levels, which are a stress hormone, to spike in the body. This leads to long-term nervous system dysregulation. This tag, along with elevated cortisol levels, can be passed to offspring, predisposing them to stress disorders such as anxiety and PTSD, as well as a hyperactive nervous system. When discussing ancestral trauma, it is important to also remember that each and every one of us was carried in our grandmother's womb at a cellular level. At approximately 4 months into gestation, all of the eggs that will ever be within a female's body begins to form at a cellular level in her uterus as she's in her mother's uterus. That means that the cell that eventually became you was inside of your mother's womb when she was in her mother's womb. This means that every single cell that would eventually become your mother's children, including you, was carried in your grandmother's womb for 5 to 6 months, and then continued to be carried in your biological mother's womb her entire life up until the moment she gave birth with you. The uterus is composed of mostly muscle, which is approximately 75% to 79% water. The amniotic fluid that protects a fetus in utero is made up almost entirely of water for the first 20 weeks of pregnancy before eventually becoming more composed of fetal urine. Although it is still widely considered pseudoscience, there are studies that have shown that water could potentially store memory as well as have a reaction to positive and negative environments. If these studies are to be true, imagine what gestating inside of a If these studies are true, imagine what gestating inside of a womb that has experienced trauma. If these studies are true, imagine the possible impact that this could have on a gestating egg or fetus in utero. If these studies are to be true, imagine what gestating inside of a womb that has experienced traumas on any scale could potentially Imagine how that could potentially impact an egg or a fetus. Even without the hypothetical of the water memory theory, a fetus still experiences its mother's environment in utero. Maternal stress and trauma can directly impact a developing nervous system of a fetus. Not to mention, again, the exact cell that created you experienced your mother's entire life on a cellular level. Your mother's womb was the first home you ever knew. So of course that environment would impact you. Another way this wound still survives is through societal conditioning. Societal conditioning is similar to the conditioning received from ancestral trauma. However, this more so stems from the observation of society, whether that be through media, education, communities, and relationships, and just the views and beliefs and behaviors of those around you, whether these are directly stated or unspoken, as well as implied through positive and negative reinforcement. Some ways that societal conditioning directly impacts the witch wound is through internalized misogyny, fear of being authentically perceived, the normalization of the sister wound, which we will be discussing in an episode soon. So if you are curious to learn about that, please go ahead and subscribe and turn on notifications so you'll be alerted when that episode comes out. But it also shows up as the invalidation of intuition and capitalistic views on success and worth. This wound is also impacted by patriarchal control and religious extremism, which both still continue to run rampant in modern day society. In many religious groups, women are still often seen as helpmeets or someone who only exists to make the existence of a man easier. Governments still suppress women's rights and the wage gap still exists. In the US and many other countries, there are no mandates on parental leave, which often leads to women having to pump breast milk in a broom closet at the office just weeks after giving birth, and then be shamed for having to return to work in the first place, despite the fact that a single income household is not always realistic in our modern economy. Brief trigger warning for this next section. Go ahead and skip about 30 seconds and you should be clear. Trigger warnings for mentions of sexual abuse, torture, rape, sex trafficking, abuse of children and babies, cannibalism, and the Epstein files. Go ahead and skip now. There is detailed recorded documentation, including emails, phone calls, videos, photos, and more, containing over 6 million pages of evidence, 3.5 million of which are publicly accessible on www.justice.gov, that shows that government officials and the corporate elite have been trafficking, raping, torturing, murdering, cannibalizing countless women, children, and babies. Not a single person who was named as a criminal of heinous sex crimes against children and babies, not a single one of them has been tried or persecuted for any of the crimes that they have committed, despite being explicitly publicly named committing heinous sex crimes against women, children, and babies. One man in particular, who was named more times in these Epstein files than Jeffrey Epstein himself, and more times than Jesus Christ has been named in the Bible, is currently sitting in the White House of the United States as the president. When we have a man who has committed atrocious sex crimes in one of the most influential positions of power, we are continuing to prove to our society that it is okay when men rape, and that women and children's voices do not matter. Till men in power are held accountable for their actions, we are just going to continue to see this wound resurface again and again and again and again. Trigger warning over. There are also issues with things such as the SAVE Act, which is attempting to prevent married women who have had name changes and trans people who have changed their names, trying to prevent them from being able to vote. Roe v. Wade has been overturned, making it illegal in many states for women to get life-saving procedures. Not to mention the entirety of Project 2025 and the whole glamorization and idealization of the trad wife are forcing women to go back into hidden, unseen roles to be used only for cooking, cleaning, childcare, and wifely duties. We are actively time traveling backwards during a moment in history where it is more crucial than ever for women to speak up, take a stand, and speak their truth. When we discuss the witch wound impacting women today, we can take a look at how this wound creates a fear of authenticity, speaking one's truth, and embodying personal power, because these things have been repeatedly punished through centuries. It causes a deep unspoken fear of being ostracized, outcast, or even banished from communities simply for being different or being spiritual or sensitive or truthfully just comfortable in your own skin with who you are. This wound leads women to feel unsafe, taking up space and showing authority. In some spaces, this can even present as women feeling like they have to show up as more masculine in order to be heard and treated with respect. This causes many women to feel the need to submit to patriarchy, conform to the status quo, and just accept that this is how things are. This wound also causes women to repress their sacred sexuality and creative expression. The witch wound also shows up in interpersonal relationships by causing women to feel the need to turn on one another or to conform to the male gaze, all while creating a false narrative that one woman's win is another woman's failure. When truthfully speaking, we are so much stronger and more powerful when we all come together in sacred sisterhood. It teaches women that our basic needs and desires are unimportant because conformity and submission is what keeps us alive. But it's time to stop shrinking ourselves and continue living in survival mode. So how can we move out of survival mode and begin to heal this wound? Now that we have identified this wound, its history, and how it has survived so long, as well as ways it shows up in modern life, we can finally begin to heal this wound. The first step to healing any wound is identification, and although we've done that through this episode and last week's episode, it is important you take a moment to self-reflect on ways that this wound shows up in your personal life, as well as become aware and taking notice when it comes up naturally in your day-to-day life. Once it's been identified, you can begin to heal this wound by being the change that you want to see on an individual level. This could look like showing up more authentically, speaking up about the things that you're passionate about, or maybe indulging in the hobbies that make you feel more you. Brain dump in your journal about things that have been on your mind recently or things that have been lighting you up, and get comfortable with your authentic identity. It is also important when healing this wound to support the women around you. Do you know a mom who seems to do it all? Because truthfully, speaking from experience, she's probably drowning. So ask if you can make her and her kids dinner. Come over and help her clean the house. Offer to take the kids for ice cream or to the park so she can have a few hours to herself. Support women-owned businesses and female artists and women-led communities. Compliment a woman that you pass by on the street and spark up a kind conversation. Build sacred sisterhood and safe communities for women. Advocate for women's rights. Celebrate differences and uniqueness. Most importantly, de-center patriarchy and re-center the vulnerable. There's so much that you can do on a personal level to heal this wound, and it is really important to remember that women need community to heal. I mean, that's why we've lived in community for thousands of years, up until we switched from a matrilineal society to a patriarchal society. We are so much stronger and so much more powerful when we come together as a community. The more you heal, the more your community heals, and the more your community heals, the more the collective consciousness heals. When we come together in embracing our divinity and uniqueness within each and every one of us, we can begin to heal this wound together. Thank you so much for joining me today. Again, I'm Carmen Lilith, aka the Yoga Witch. I will see you next week for a summer solstice episode. Dreaming out loud.